And please remember that we are being recorded. And so shall we begin? Father Ray, would you please lead us in one of your beautiful prayers?
Sure. Let us pray. You who see all difference in the splendor that is difference, and yet who see all with equal love and in powerful relationship with one another, we wish to now draw near to you. We wish to see as you see. We seek the power of your Spirit among us as we try to discern how to find that sacred balance of being wonder-filled at our diversity and wonder-filled at what is common to us all and draws us into a unity that completes us. We ask this through Jesus, who lived this deeply and taught us to live it so, who lives eternally with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, forever and ever, to which we all joyfully say,
Amen.
And
Thank you, Father. That was beautiful.
You're welcome.
So at our last meeting, there was unanimous agreement that we should continue our own education about the diverse effects of racism, which persists still. During the discussion, several creative ideas on how to keep learning were suggested. These included, in addition to reading historical narratives and researched accounts of how thorough racism is embedded in our institutions and culture, sharing works from across the spectrum of the movement for racial justice and equity in the literary and in the performing arts. The ideas were so creative, we seemed to be saying to one another, why not? So why not indeed? Why not really get and build a very diverse way of going on and continuing our learning? Jack Schmidt began a bibliography for us, and he is going to let us add for one another additional reading, listening, TV viewing, even performances that interest us individually about our society's original sin. So we can send our title or titles to Jack with a couple sentences of description of the content and the medium to be added to the list. And then we will share his list that we've built with one another. And we'll give that to one or two members of our team so that we can, if we want, break off into pairs, triads, whatever we want on any or all of these wonderful ways of learning. And it can take many forms. As a matter of fact, just a couple of days ago, John and Audrey Rogers gave us another great idea to add to that list. And that's their cousin, Richard Messick, who does excellent presentations on the history and locations of the slave markets that existed in our city. He's done that through the Baltimore Heritage, and he has consented to be willing to do that for us. So that's another thing to be added into our body of learning. And I would like to do that soon. So once we set a date for that, we'll have that. But in addition to that, you want to read Misty Copeland's the prima ballerina of the New York City Ballet Company, first Black woman to be that. You want to read her autobiography or Maya Angelou's or Dr. Gates's PBS series, any of that. All of that's fodder for different ways of learning, not just reading. With that, let's move on. So, how often should this group meet? This is a question for all of us. Let's hear some of your thoughts on that and see how we do want to proceed over the coming months. What are your feelings?
are you talking of this large group or the smaller?
No, our whole, our
Discussion
group
groups.
as a whole, our continued, regular, we have a dream get-togethers. You want them on a monthly basis, bi-monthly basis? What are your feelings?
Some groups that I'm in, they meet every other month rather than every month, especially in the summertime, but
Mhm.
That seems to work well also.
I think Reed and Denny have their hands up, one of them.
Oh, you're muted, Rita and Denny. If you were going to talk, unmute yourselves. There, yes.
I thought once a month would be fine. Just to keep the information and the issues alive and fluid. If we meet every other month, as Mary Catherine suggested, this topic may have a tendency to move off. And I think we need to stay on top of this topic and make it as fluid as we can. So my suggestion would be once a month.
Okay. Elizabeth, is that your hand up here? Did you want to say? Okay. Okay. Anyone else? Father Ray.
I think it kind of depends on what we want to seek to accomplish from one meeting to the next. So if you just talked about doing reading, I know me, it would take a couple of months to read something. So I think part of the answer to your question is based on what is the committee and vision. And I apologize, I wasn't at the last meeting where I know you talked about some of that.
Mhm.
I think it depends on what the vision is for what the committee wants to do. So if it is, as you're saying, with Jack putting together a reading list to really continue to educate ourselves and learn, then I would think that having my side of it anyway, additional time to read, and not just to read, but to be thoughtful and think about the implications for us as a community.
Yeah, it's going to be a very diverse list, Father. It's going to be reading, but it also might be a TV presentation that someone saw that, we could get off of YouTube. So lots of things. And as I just mentioned, the presentation from Richard Messick, like the presentations we had from Justin and Jill, and prior to that, Dr. Brown. So we want a big mix of a lot of things.
Yeah, it could be a podcast that, somebody thinks is pretty stimulating. It would be fun to talk about it that month.
Phil? You're muted. You're muted, Phil.
Oh, I see him.
I'm
There.
sorry I missed the last meeting, but there's a convergence of things for me. I'm getting ready to watch the second round of the new Ken Burns film about what we were doing in this country in the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And you could splice out what we were dealing with in terms of the Jewish community and look at what we're dealing with right now. And I think there's a huge richness out there, and that maybe the way to look at this is this is a group here, but if what we were able to do is to have a place in the letter, a link to the activities of this group, and not just list 5 people getting together with Ken Burns, but list who the 5 were, so that we begin to seep out what we're doing, seeps out into the larger community, and not just make we're the only ones thinking about this. I think there's a structural way to make this still immediate and still a deep engagement, and at the same time get the word spread out in a routinized way.
Yeah.
Yes, and thank you.
Thanks.
And actually, our hope is that once we do get a full list and people decide to maybe, join together or in threes or fives on something, that after you've had some time to really get into what you're doing, that would be the presentation to the whole group. You'd come back, share what you read and what you discussed and what you got out of it, whether that was a book, or whether that was Ken Burns, the Holocaust presentation. We would all share so that everybody would get the benefits of what other people did, because we can't all do it all. But this would be a way of getting the benefit from what everybody did.
And we did
Can I just-
discuss, Phil, oh, sorry.
Can I just say, though, I don't think it needs to be turned back into this group. I think it's to get out to the whole community.
Okay.
Yeah, and we did discuss using the e-news frequently. For example, this week in the news, there will be a link to the interview that the executive director of South Baltimore Community Land Trust gave on the radio, which kind of explains land trusts, which is a really important part of understanding how they're making housing affordable in their community. So we hope to be able to at least monthly put something in the e-news about their progress, if they're having a groundbreaking, to try to, as you say, Phil, get the whole community a little more involved. And they will be at church Sunday to give a little presentation and answer some questions and display some of their artwork. So we're hoping, because you're right, that's our major thrust for attaining some racial justice in a neighborhood, and that's what South Baltimore Community Land Trust. And the education piece is for us also, and of course anyone who would want to join us. So yeah, thank you.
So it sounds like we feel comfortable still with a monthly gathering, especially once we get going and we start learning actively from one another based on what we're involved in and reading. Is that
And
right?
for Marianne and Mary Kevin, if it is something that we're ready to discuss, like a book, I think then that would be fine too if we skip a month. So
Yeah.
we'll be kind of open to that. Marianne, I
Yeah.
think you were next.
Yeah, I was thinking, since it sounded like the question was, should we structure a schedule? And yet we're also trying to give people time. Would we ever consider we would meet as the whole group 1 month, and then the off month would be a time for people to do, not that TV shows or plays or whatever will conveniently schedule themselves in our off month, but that maybe we could have a rotation, because I think there's a real benefit to our getting the same education, like, the white fragility discussion, which I believe we're going to have tonight and we're going to learn. I think that needs to continue, but if every other month, maybe we could do this small groupy thing or whatever, and part of the next month's whole group would be to report a bit on what we discovered.
Beautiful. That's perfect. And it fits with what Father was saying too. Let the demands of the time or the moment sort of dictate whether we hold or not hold. So, okay, I think we've got an understanding. And once we get the list together and share it, then we can begin to plot it out.
And we would also, this is going to imply that we need your help, because we can't plan all these things every month and be in every place. So we're counting on you all to identify what would be good. And we can put it out to the group that, okay, let's everybody try to watch this, and those who want to discuss it, we can meet. So we will need definitely your help on that, and with
Yeah.
Jack's bibliography. And I think Jerry was next, and then Rita. You're muted, Jerry.
Where is Jerry?
Did anybody get Baltimore Magazine that delivered to you? Okay.
I don't.
in Baltimore, next to Baltimore Magazine was a little magazine called Baltimore Game Changers about people and programs that are transforming Baltimore. And when I opened it up and was reading about all of these people, Melanie from South Baltimore Community Trust.
Yeah.
This is, I tried really hard to download this some kind of way or to find a link to it or whatever and send it to everybody. But, it's just a short question and answer about what is SBCLT. And she talks about environmental racism and the environment and how it impacted, the community and what they're trying to do. But I was so surprised. It was random. I just found it and opened it.
Jerry, it's so funny you said that because we were sworn to secrecy. So Skip and I have been invited to attend the ceremony when they make the awardees, but we were sworn to secrecy. We didn't know it was out yet. So we've been keeping our
So now we can talk. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Oh,
So
that's great.
maybe, can you bring it next time you come? Can you bring it and maybe I'll try to blow it up and post it or something?
I can try to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be
Copy
great.
of it on Sunday.
Thank you.
And just back briefly to Sunday, we're asking everybody on our team, if you can, really do try to stay for that 15 minutes. And we feel that if you're available to mingle with and help in any way, that will sort of continue the fellowship that we started, at the last time at the town hall meeting. And I think Peggy's already mentioned they're going to bring some beautiful artwork. We'll have tags for all of us, and email us if you have any specific questions you think that they should address. We learned more about their working capital because of grants, bonds, and fundraising. And they're going to share a little of that on Sunday.
And I think Rita and Denny are next.
Yeah, just one thing with what we just discussed, Peggy. I think we need to find out when we could get Richard Messick on to do that presentation, since we're going to continue our learning. Audrey,
can we do that offline though, do you think?
do you think? And we'll just schedule it, since it's going to be for one of our rehab meetings.
We'll try to pick a
Okay.
third Wednesday if we can.
Yeah, that would be great. Whether it's the next one or whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Rita and Denny? You're muted if you're talking.
Okay, I thought I had fixed it, but it went back. I just wanted to comment on, or maybe ask Mary Ann a clarification. Are you saying that every other month we have the regular meeting of all of us, and the in-between months, just the people that read that book or saw that program would meet?
May I answer there?
Sure.
Okay. I was just throwing out an idea. I would think that in the off month, or in the 2 months, even from one large meeting to the next, if people could find things to do and take that, as a time to find a book, read the book, tell people here you're reading the book, and did anybody want to chat about it? Or if there's a play that people might want to go to, and I'm out of quarantine by then. Things like that we'd have sort of our honor homework to do in the middle time. I mean, because yes, we can be reading a book during the month of the full group meeting, so we have kind of 2 months to actually, or find articles or find podcasts or something.
So
and if
you were not thinking that we would, like, if you and 6 other people read such and such a book, you weren't talking about just the 7 of you discussing that. You were talking about 1 month where everybody discusses the different things that they're doing.
Yes, I mean, I was thinking if 6 of us read one book and the 6 of us happened to want to talk about it in the interim, I think that would be cool, but not necessarily required. And then, you know, we might bring what we found or wanted to share with the whole group. I was just, I wasn't setting it in stone. I just was throwing out some possibilities.
That's all I was thinking, that
Thanks,
if you're
Mary.
going to meet and discuss it, I think the rest of us should be here so we get the benefit of knowing about that book or that play or whatever.
Mhm. Jody?
Thanks, Rita.
Yeah.
Jody?
I think I feel a little bit differently. I feel like we've got such a great momentum every month. And I definitely don't think the burden should be on Peg and Skip to come up with the agenda. But even if we just get together for half an hour and just say, oh, are you reading something or what's happening? Or maybe there's been a racial incident that's come up that somebody wants to share, that if we just had that time, and if people obviously don't have to get on, but if we kept a regular once a month meeting, and then if in a meeting somebody says, oh, anybody want to go to this play, you know, that can happen. Or, you know, 3 of us are reading this, let's talk about that next month. And I just feel like maybe just to have a little bit of time anyway, each month would be helpful.
Dennis?
Jody. But we're not
Yeah,
coming to Boston for a movie.
yeah,
Dennis?
So you're
Dennis?
talking about meeting, like, without an agenda, except for, hey, is anybody doing any cool stuff they want to share?
And
But
at
making-
times we might have an agenda, maybe the month before, and Peg and Skip and I, we still meet every week. So if something comes up, we may have it on our radar to say, oh, you know, let's do this. Or
yeah.
Dennis?
I was gonna say, currently I'm reading this book about, it's a biography of Harriet Tubman and The Road to Freedom. Joan Fulton lent me the book, and it's very is epic like, because it covers her life and also the history of the country around the Civil War and her interactions and her involvement in the war itself and how she helped out. And notable figures are mentioned like John Brown, and it's kind of a slow reading book, though. I found it difficult to read it every day, and I've had it for a good while now. So as Father Ray was saying, you know, it might take 2 months to read the book, and before we could talk about it. And so I'm going to suggest that as one of the books we could read to Jack, put it on the list.
Good.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Dennis.
Dennis.
I think
Um,
Sharon has her hand up.
okay.
We might just take 2 more, okay? Sharon and
Yeah, I
Jack,
was just gonna
quickly,
say.
because we have to get to our white fragility, or you guys will shoot us if we have to do it a 3rd month.
We'll shoot ourselves.
Yeah.
I would
Sharon?
like to support the continuing monthly meeting, but I also would like to support varying the structure some, so that you have 1 month where it's very much like what we're doing today and have been doing in the past. But then the alternate month, we develop a different pattern, a different rhythm. And it would be like, okay, maybe it would be, here's something that happened that I noticed on PBS or whatever or so forth, or an article that I saw in the Baltimore Sun, wherever. But I just think that it would also engender, SBCLT may have some things, or will have some things coming up.
Mhm.
And that would be considered for the alternate Wednesdays. I just think that change up would be good.
Yeah,
Thanks, Sharon.
thank you so much.
And we'll
Peggy?
take a final comment from Jack.
Yes, I just wanted to encourage everybody. Right now, the bibliography only has 9 books, 7 recommended by John Rogers, 1 by Owen Draper, and 1 by Jody. So if you have read something in the past, which I'm sure some of you have, think about writing a little review and send it, the book and the review, to me, and we can start off pretty soon. Don't be afraid to, don't hesitate to write a good review. That'll be excellent. That's all.
Okay.
Thanks, Jack. Appreciate it. So in
Okay,
May,
Peggy.
we began, I'm sorry, what'd
No,
you
I'm
say?
just saying, Peggy, take it.
Okay. In May, we began our discussion. Skip actually began it by asking, why do many white people react strongly and negatively at a personal level to terms describing the effects of systemic and structural racism, especially in terms of white privilege and white supremacy? So we mentioned that a key element to addressing systemic racism is to first understand and acknowledge that it exists. So what do you say when you meet people who don't believe racism exists? One way is to admit we didn't know much of the history that brought us to that belief and only learned it through intense study and conversation. That makes it easier for others to admit their own lack of knowledge. Without knowledge of our history, we cannot uncover how racism pervaded our systems and structures. We discuss the ongoing racism without racists. That is, some people perceive that only bad people are racist, so that absolves them of any guilt and taking any action. So they see racism as something that puts others at a disadvantage, but not that it puts them at an advantage or gives white people privilege. So that is part of the reason that white people in racial discussions are called fragile and dismiss racism as a problem. So we had some rich discussions in May, and we will have time for those again tonight. But first, look at a headline from an article that Jerry DeLomba sent us. So this happened to a highly educated professional couple. What do you think would happen to ordinary, less advantaged people?
Can I just throw in, Peggy, that
Sure.
professors at Johns Hopkins.
Both professors, aren't they?
Yes.
So it's amazing, just amazing. So now Jody's going to help us better understand white privilege from her viewpoint.
So I've been greatly privileged, and I grew up white in a hardworking but affluent family where my education and opportunities were given with every resource that I needed in a healthy environment. I'm very grateful for my nurturing family, even though I did not understand really the depth of my white privilege until recently, when I've learned about Black people's experience and the bias against them. Remember the doll experiment where the Black children saw the white dolls as better? Sometimes it's difficult to truly understand and feel this privileged imbalance. But what helps me better understand this are my experiences as a woman and feeling the effects of sexism in our historically white, male-dominated society. I actually had a male department chair respond to my request to teach calculus with, "Can you handle it?" Believe me, that did not come from my transcript, but from my gender. And I presently teach at an all-boys Catholic school, and the experience of the female faculty is very different from the male faculty. There's initial respect given to the male teachers that's not afforded to the females. For a while, I was the only female department chair. And as silly as this sounds, I think the reason that I was well respected was because I taught math. However, even my mom said to me after I had taught high school math for 40 years, "Don't you think men are better teachers?" Clearly, that was her unconscious bias. I also belong to a church that's patriarchal. We women can serve, but not lead. The church's parameters and society's bias put restrictions on me. One of the most emotionally satisfying effects of privilege is that sense of belonging, knowing you fit anywhere in society. White male constructs have historically meant that Black people and women would not see themselves reflected in those making decisions, and thus lack a full sense of belonging. This image, without Black people or women, is still common in policy and decision-making bodies. You may recognize Mike Pence circled there. Even with small increases, these boardrooms are still a snapshot of white male privilege. And thinking about my experiences of gender bias and male privilege has helped me better understand my white privilege. I'm going to stop sharing here.
Thank you, Jody. So admitting our white norm as a standard helps us understand our unconscious bias. So perhaps sharing some history of women's lack of rights and institutional control helps others understand the similar lack for Black people. So would we have one or two people who want to comment, or anybody have an example of that?
And we're going to do that throughout tonight's presentation. We're going to pause at different times to really get reactions or perceptions based on what was just presented. So anybody?
Anne?
Well, as a nurse and as a nurse practitioner, I've had lots of experiences of being kind of put aside because I'm female, you know, in a construct that, you know, the male physicians were always the better educated and had the better methods of, you know, diagnosing and prescribing as opposed to nurse practitioners. And especially since I was a woman, even physician assistants who, you know, were not necessarily female, but could be male too, even though because they had the physician assistant title, their salaries were higher. They had, you know, more respect from, I think, physicians in general, as opposed to, you know, me as a nurse practitioner. And maybe Audrey can speak to this even better than I can. But, you know, over and over, you know, I was coming up, you know, against, you know, this male dominated, you know, medical construct where, you know, nurses weren't given, you know, the respect or assumed to have the knowledge that they needed. You know, if I was in a patient's room and a physician walked in, the patient would immediately defer to the doctor, even though I had already started or was doing what I was doing and was already educating. But as soon as that doctor walked in the door, you know, it was like nothing I said had made any difference at all. I mean, that just happened over and over and over again, you know, in a very female dominated or male dominated, female, you know, dominated, you know, profession where the, you know, nurses were generally women and doctors were generally female or male. It got better as there were more female physicians, you know, and there were several female physicians that I work with that gave me an amazing amount of respect, and it just really uplifted me. But generally, you know, I was up against, you know, this kind of attitude that, you know, I wasn't a doctor and I wasn't male, so therefore I couldn't possibly know what I was talking about.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dennis? Is your hand up, Dennis?
No, no.
Oh,
it's not.
okay.
I'm sorry.
I think that knowing how women then achieve some things and were allowed in more boardrooms and sooner, we can imagine, we white people, how it has been for Black people. One of my Black friends has been stopped by the police 56 times. Never anything happened, 56 times. So
Yeah.
anyway, another problem with we white people, we don't always speak up to stop racist remarks, but we stay in that comfort of our group. They shush children's comments like, that man's skin is Black, as if it's a bad thing. So a child learns being Black is seen as undesirable, leading to racial socialization. So people profess to be colorblind and not racist, but inequitable distribution of resources continues. So without seeing the differences, there's no reason to change the systems. I was on a webinar the other day, I think it was Networks, and they were like, policies got us here, policies need to get us out. So we need to make sure we are all voting for the things that we need to. Skip?
Did you do about admitting our white norm as a standard, Peggy?
Do you
We're
have
kind of off script.
Do you have the new script? You start with how we talk about racism and bias with others is critical?
Yes, I didn't know if you had done what was ahead of that. Okay. So how we talk about racism and bias with others is critical to avoid defensiveness. People talk about the good old days, for instance. Well, for whom? Globalization and the erosion of workers' rights had a huge impact on the white working class, and the white elite directed the working class's resentment against people of color. Those who controlled the economy managed to concentrate more wealth into fewer hands. Income allows a family to get by. Wealth allows a family to get ahead. The call to make America great again worked to racially manipulate white people, diverting blame away from the white elite and toward undocumented workers, immigrants, the Chinese, for the conditions of white working class people. These are hard conversations because of the polarization that exists in our country.
So to start a racial conversation, we might discuss with a white friend that we have never felt like we did not belong, and that we saw ourselves in the families we saw on TV as children. Joe McNeely gave us some great advice about making the conversation personal and asking questions to find out if the person believes there are barriers to equality in the United States. Like, when you were struggling to put yourself through school, did you know students whose family paid their way and had advantages you didn't? Or you might say, let's consider why dolls in the stores were all white. Or why Band-Aids matched whose skin? Certainly not a Black person's until recently. And what about makeup? So what are our white experiences compared to a person of color? So these experiences show the white dominance in our stores and might be a place to begin a conversation because people could probably relate to that. So think of other cultural items that seem to show a lack of thoughtfulness about people of color. To think that our whiteness gives us privilege is just a fluke, denies the intentional systemic dimensions of racism that we've talked about so much. There wasn't a Black woman in Congress until 1968. Growing up, the white view was what mattered. So why was this? Why all of a sudden did 9 to 10-year-olds, if there was an adult present, acted differently? Implicit bias was taught to children. And once we understand the power of implicit bias, we must lean into discussions and reiterate, if we have a brain, we are biased, and we perpetuate racism if we don't work for change. So the 9 to 10-year-olds are now old enough to know racism isn't right, and they hide it. So all races have bias, but white people had the power and embedded racism throughout our systems. White people have to see it to commit to change it. So have you heard these?
Sorry, I put that on too early.
That's all right.
No.
So think how you would respond. I'm sure there isn't anybody here who hasn't heard some of these.
Right.
And many whites, we morally object to racism, but we don't acknowledge our complicity. Defensiveness is a common reaction in racial conversations. So let's ask ourselves how we might respond to these comments. Shortly, also, we're going to ask some of the Black members of our group if they tried giving a white person racial feedback and ask what happened. So when Robin DiAngelo gave feedback in workshops, white recipients were very defensive. These are typical white rules of how they want feedback from people of color. If these narrow parameters aren't met, they are closed to feedback and discourage conversation for an honest look at racism. They don't want to be judged or shamed, guilty or silenced. They want to be treated with kid gloves. These rules hijack the conversation, making white people the victims. It is difficult for a person of color to give feedback that isn't dismissed by whites protecting their dominance. Robin DiAngelo gives these suggestions on how whites should handle feedback. Jody, you might have skipped one.
No.
Should be right after that. Huh. All right. There's a long history of Black men being tortured because of white women's tears. So our focus must stay on excising racism and inequity, unlike Amy Cooper in the park. Imagine the struggles of a person of color navigating white fragility in these conversations. Let's stop and discuss for a bit and hear some experiences that depict white fragility. And if Dennis or Sharon or Skip, if you'd be willing to go first, I'd like to hear from our Black friends first. Let's go to that, back to that question. Have you ever tried to give feedback to a white friend, Sharon? Or you can answer a different part of it.
What is, at my age, I was born in 1947. And so having gone through the ends of Jim Crow, civil rights movement, et cetera, so forth. Because the history of this country is either not taught or not accurately taught or fully taught, it's difficult to bring up white fragility or to speak to someone. I have had people, usually what I have done in my life is I'll describe, well, I'll go into a department store and everyone gets waited on before I ever get acknowledged. I have been chastised by questioning in my workplace someone who was always white, sometimes male or female, but in a superior position. It was like, how you, well, you don't know anything about that. When I, at that moment, had far more preparation, far more education, and far more experience, it's like you were saying, how can you teach calculus? It's so many times that I've walked into rooms. I've been at, back in the day when I was still with American Airlines, I'd go to a meeting and someone would turn around and ask me, well, can you get some coffee? Or why aren't you getting the coffee? Or I'd like to have a cup of coffee with cream. And you know, it just goes, it goes on and on. But to get someone to focus on that, it takes time. It takes bringing forth personal experiences, which not everyone is happy or wants to share, but you have to bring it down to a parallel level or you're not going to get through.
I had trouble answering the question in a way, Peggy, because I have to confess, what I realized I've done for much of my life is avoid getting into that conversation. And it comes from things that Sharon just said. For instance, I used to realize I'd be sitting in a meeting and I'd always be maybe the only or one of only two persons of color, you know, in the room that looked like the board meeting Jody put up. And I would say something and it would just get passed over and two or three people would talk. Then maybe the third person after that would basically say the same thing I had said. And everybody jumped on, oh yeah, that's a great idea. And I'm saying, damn, what was I speaking, Chinese?
Mhm.
It's that sort of thing. And I found most recently just how I had acculturated myself to avoiding a conversation, because for about 32 years, I would work out in the morning at the Merit Athletic Club that was attached to the head office. And I'd be working out with the managers and all of Merit. And some of the managers were just regular, everyday guys, you know, saw themselves even as rednecks. And one morning, one of the guys who I really, really love, we were very close, caught me off guard. And he asked me point blank, Skip, why is it that Black people can't seem to move ahead and get it together? And I froze because he was earnestly asking. And I was finding myself wrestling with, do I dare really talk to you on a level which maybe will, you know, cause the end of the joking in the morning as we dress and all of that, because you can't take what I have to say.
Yeah.
Thank you, Skip and Sharon. Dennis, did you want to add anything?
Well, I don't know if I ever had been in a situation where I had to explain to a white person difficulties I may have had because of race, except, yes, I have done that in the past to this group. As a matter of fact, I mentioned something, but I was thinking about a situation that happened last Friday at the park. And, what we're giving out, food and everything to the hungry. And one of the people who were there, someone I respect, said something negative about one of the white workers who was there. She was Black and referred to him as white trash. And I'm not sure if he heard it or not, but I thought it was really something that was unnecessary, and it wasn't collegial, because we were all out there trying to help each other. And so I felt bad in a way because I didn't say anything. I didn't challenge her. And but that's something that happened recently, which I'm concerned about, and I don't think it's been resolved yet at this point in time.
Thank you, Dennis. We can talk about that too offline. It's not easy to say stuff to other people who hold an opposite opinion. It's just
Just
it's
one
not
thing.
easy. Sharon.
There's something I'd like to say. Generally, across white people accept that they have differences within the white race. That you have your good performers, your bad performers, you judge each other by what you see, what you know. Unfortunately, so many times when white people look at people of color, we're all the same. We're all the same. We're going to manifest the same behavior. In other words, if we're acting nice right now, if we're not stealing, we're not looting, we're not yelling, we're not cursing, and whatever we're not doing, it's just, well, give them enough time, they'll get there. Because for the most part, the white structure in America doesn't recognize that there is a social hierarchy structure within people of color. And I'll be very frank, within people of color, we have people in our own who have trouble recognizing that as well, that we're not all the same. Some of us have been more fortunate, had different experience, had better education, yada, yada. So there's always among people of color a desire to say it's a level field. And that only takes time. When you see someone who's in how many Black lawyers do you have to see? How many scientists do you have to see? How many artists do you have to see? It's just, until you dispel that, then it's just there.
Has anyone had a successful conversation talking to someone who says that they don't believe racism exists? Has anyone had a successful turnaround or had any good comments they were able to say that actually made a difference?
Many of us have families which are diverse. I mean, I've got uh, Latino nephews, mixed race nephews and nieces. I mean, it's a beautiful family. But in the one or two instances where, the sister-in-law is white or whatever, when they can be so close to us that, we'll just let loose sometimes and be ourselves, or, like my brother-in-law will say something and Pam or one of the sisters say, "Oh, nigga, please," right with his wife, Judy, right there. But when you want to talk to Judy about something, that's when it kind of clams up, because her whole defensiveness is, I grew up in a Black neighborhood. As the neighborhood turned over, my father and mother didn't move. I went to a school with Black students. How can I possibly be racist? And so you can't get into those things that are just part of her being in a dominant culture, and she takes it very personally. And it's such a confusing situation. You just kind of give up and stop, because on the one hand, she is personally so open, we can say things we would never say around a white person. But on the other hand, you can't bring up to her those elements, like when we're really showing how frustrated we are by Republicans, excuse me, that's the way I feel, but the racism that goes on within parties and stuff like that. And, she and some of her sisters are very much evidencing some of those allegiances.
Yeah, I think we all have experienced, well, I shouldn't assume we all do, but many of us I know have experiences within our family where we're very polarized at the moment. And many of us, I included, have gone with family is too important to have a rift. And I'm not, I mean, we have discussions, but not to the point where it's very meaningful, because it's hard to make inroads. So I really have been struggling with how to approach this and how we can have these discussions, which need to happen, I think, without being a coward, which I am. And it is difficult. So Jerry, you want to?
I'm just going to say something and then I'm not going to repeat it again. I might have written it in my writing. I think Al knows what I'm going to say because I've mentioned it on Facebook. And to get back to what Dennis just said, I was extremely upset and hurt being called white trash by a Black woman when I was 19, 20 years old. My girlfriend had a boyfriend. She was white, he was Black. They had been prom king and queen at their high school. Okay. And, they got together. He was basketball team, she was cheerleader. And they had a cousin, or the boy had a cousin, and he was young. And we drove him home from community college one night, and we're in the backyard. And he lived with his aunt, one of his aunts, and stepmother, and she came out screaming to my girlfriend's boyfriend, "You get this white trash out of my yard." And it just hurt me that, number one, I was a good girl, as good girls are. I lived at home, I gave my mother money and my father money for my work, and I was working my way through college. There was nothing trashy about me at all. And then the other crazy thing is, I had known this from a department store I went to and talked to her. When I went shopping, she was working in the department store, did not recognize me in the backyard, just saw my skin color and assumed because we were with, and she assumed because we were with Black young men that we were white trash. And for some reason that it sticks with me. It's like, how could, how could somebody say that to me? I know I didn't grow up in an elite home, we were like, I guess, lower middle class, blue collar, Dundalk, that kind of thing. And worked our way through college and all. Nobody gave us anything, but it just, it was just really at the time hurtful and painful. And I just want to mention that it's not unusual for people to call each other out of their names like that, call each other. And but I just wanted to say it one more time, and then I'm not going to talk about it anymore.
Well, and Jerry, listen to a piece of what you said. A piece of it was you were assuming that maybe she called you that because you were hanging out with some Black friends.
Is the only reason that I can think of, having not knowing she knew me. That's the other strange part, is that I knew her. I used to talk to her in the department store when she was working and I was in there shopping or whatever. And very nice lady, we talk to each other all the time. And then I'm in her backyard and all of a sudden, we're white trash. And she didn't holler at her stepson. She hollered at my girlfriend's boyfriend. Who was, you get this white trash out of my yard. And she was screaming.
And we can probably come up with a few examples of things like that for white people. Can you imagine how many times this has happened to our Black friends?
I know. So you can see how hurtful. It's something that,
Yes.
carries with you. And I should really just forget about it and not say anything else about it anymore. But if ever there's a place to bring it up, it's a place where, I'm told I have this privilege and I'm trying to fight to find it, having had to work for everything, I didn't go to law school till I was 52. I paid my own way, that kind of thing. So, so it's kind of hard to see that I'm white. So that means I have privilege. So I just, that's why I have to be here.
Jerry, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate your openness and your honesty. It means so much to me that you feel that you could just say your truth to this group, and that's how we all grow. All of us have sticking points. I know I have mine, and I just want to tell you how much I really admire you and appreciate your being here with us.
Thank you.
Liz, I think you were next.
You had asked if any of us had successes. And I did have one conversation, only one, with a friend of mine from the Midwest. It seems all the people I know that are more bigoted are out there. So that's some good reflection on the coast over here. And it was about Black Lives Matter. And she comes from a family that has police officers. And so she's got a definite strong view on this. And she said, I don't understand this. Black Lives Matter. Really all lives matter. I said, that's right, that's right, that's right. And then she went on to say, and statistics show that more white people are killed by police and more white people are arrested by police and blah, blah, blah. And it went on and on. So what's this thing about Black Lives Matter? And I said, I guess that's true. And I wasn't prepared for this argument, but I was just grasping at whatever I was feeling. And I said, but this is the only group that when people die, we don't weep over them, do we? And she said, we don't. I said, how many people die and they're just numbers. It's like, this is a dispensable group of people. I think the most dispensable that we've kind of created. And she said, that makes sense. Now, that was a while ago, and we've had other less congenial conversations. So this was not my lead-in for the most successful thing, but it was a little bit. And I was pleased about that because I knew where I was coming from. And I didn't want to do anything else, because I find with all the whites I talk about, the main thing is security. Oh, we've got to keep this world safe. And guess what makes it unsafe? And that's the big thing. If there's one banner or one mask they wear, it's we've got to keep things safe. And I think that was her intention, but it did turn out in a sense. And so I was really pleased about that.
Great.
But only one time. It hasn't been a lot of times.
Hey, that's
Yeah.
one. Thank
Yeah.
you. I try to respond with that with Skip's comment that he told me one time that I just loved when somebody said, don't all lives matter. He appropriately taught me, when did white lives not matter?
Oh, yes. Oh,
They've always mattered, right?
great.
So,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
that's great. Thank you, Liz.
Yeah.
Rita or Denny?
Okay. Can you hear me?
We can
Yes,
hear
we
you.
can.
Oh, okay. Mine is kind of a segue off of this. So if it's not quite appropriate for this conversation and you want to pick it up another time, that's fine. But
Okay.
some point about 15, 20 minutes ago, somebody was talking about Black women being segregated from other women and, the same as always. But I find from what I see and going to doctors' offices and going to the stores, and that there are many Black women who have jobs and are as comfortable with me as talking to anybody else. They have pleasant smiles. They're just, acting like really good people, just like anybody else who's a good person. But there are so few Black men who get a decent job. And I feel like it's Black men who get the brunt of it much more than Black women, because Black women, you see them as nurses and secretaries, and they have decent jobs, and the Black men just, they get the shaft, it seems like. But I don't know if this conversation quite fits in here, but I've never heard anybody talk about it. And I noticed it quite frequently.
Yeah, I don't think there are any of us that would argue that Black, especially when we've witnessed the justice system in these past couple of years and 5 years or whatever. I think nobody will argue with that, Rita. Mary Catherine?
I always am bragging about the wonderful Afro-American surgeon who did my surgery to remove my lung from cancer, how excellent he was. And that if I hadn't had him, I would have had much more extensive surgery, because he was young and he was able to do it robotically, where most of the white older surgeons that did the pulmonary wouldn't have been able to do it, because they weren't very good with robotics. You needed a younger, hands-on kind of person. So whenever I talk about the surgery, I always mention how wonderful my Afro-American surgeon was, because people don't always think about the excellent men that Rita was talking about. But I always want to brag about him.
Thanks, Mary Catherine.
I just wanted to bring up something. It's not directly on this, but I think it's an important aspect of Black life. W.E.B. Du Bois always talked about that we have a dichotomous way of thinking, that it's not Black and white. It can be Black and white, not Black or white. That we see both sides of the fence in a way. And in so many ways, it kind of holds back conversation. I'll give you a very practical example. Like most people on this Zoom tonight, I was caught up with the funeral of Queen Elizabeth, the beautiful things said about her, the noble and beautiful life she led, and so forth and so on. I mean, I was brought to tears a couple times by just the normal process of love and grief for someone who was good. But at the same time, maybe 2 or 3 times within the course of the whole week, a few of us might be talking and someone would just bring up the fact that this same beautiful, noble woman sat in a position of high responsibility that really was created by centuries of colonialism all over the world, in India, in Africa, in the Caribbean. And at the, you know, and it gives you a double feeling. At the same time you feel what everybody feels about her and honoring her, you also realize that she is, by the reason of being the figurehead she is, the quintessential expression of worldwide colonialism and dominance, basically on almost every continent and with other people. And then you hear about some of the people that just said, I didn't go or I didn't watch it. And basically that was the cause of it. So in so many instances, there's this double feeling among us that makes us pause while we're going along with the culture, general culture at the same time.
Good point, Skip. Jody?
So I still have my poster from Justice to Peace, hashtag Black Lives Matter, from one of the protest marches. And I was coming out of church the other day and a woman said to me, I really have trouble with that sign of yours because I leave it displayed in my back window always. And I said, oh, really? What? Why? And she said, because all lives matter. And I said, that's really true. I said, but for 400 years, one of them hasn't mattered as much. And I'm just really trying to affirm them.
Yeah.
She didn't say anything, but I have found in most cases, asking questions is at least starting a conversation. It's just so difficult when, they come back with things that you're just through your whole being disagree with, and that's just the hard part. But it's trying to stay calm and is, I guess, the best we can do to keep the conversation going.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jody. And we're going to cover, if you want to put up that next slide, Jody. Thank you all for sharing. We're going to cover a few things maybe to help us with some of these discussions.
I don't know if you still want that one.
So, yeah, we talked about a little that imagine navigating us when a white person says, well, I don't even believe there's racism. I can't even imagine how a person of color must feel when they hear statements, because we are appalled enough. I can't imagine after you've lived a life of this, how it must feel. And how sometimes I'm sure we've heard some of that you don't want to speak up, you don't want to cause a problem. So this is a really important statement. Stopping our racist patterns must be more important than convincing others that we don't have them. We really have to stop some of this. So there's some essential anti-racist rules when power is unequal, which is exactly what we have.
And these were the Robin DiAngelo rules.
The rules that we were going to show earlier, and then we switched it. So that was my fault.
Yeah.
So we must come from love and recognize that our Western society conditioned us to white supremacist worldview 24/7. It had nothing to do with our intentions, and we
Yeah.
have to focus on the how and not if our racism is manifest, because it is definitely there. We just really have to work on it. So using the anti-racist rules that you see here will help us model how to receive feedback. And we ask our Black friends to help us if they see us saying something that is not, it does not make them comfortable. And how to better give feedback to another white person, a family member, a parishioner, etc. Perhaps by admitting the mistakes that we have made and how we did not look from the perspective of a person of color will help. You know, we always talk about that. You should always look, you know, put yourself in another person's shoes. And we don't always do that. So from the perspective of a person of color, I think that'll help us. We can be curious, you know, oh, why do you feel that way? I thought, Jody, your response was good to that person. And then we have to listen. We have to listen to understand the answer and maybe review it and make sure we really have what they're saying. And then we need to validate, which a couple of you demonstrated beautifully, that we have to validate what someone else says, even if we don't agree with it. But if we validate it just to connect, it might continue the discussion somewhat.
We're validating their feelings, not what they're
Exactly.
saying.
We're validating how someone feels, and not as agreement that we agree with what they're saying, but just how they feel about something, because it's their feeling, and we have to start there. We have to start from where they are, not from where we are, which I think is what we do often. We start from where we are because we're so adamant about some of this stuff, and we can't believe that somebody could not feel the same way, but we have to start with where someone else is. And if we do have successes, please share them. Give us hints on what we can say. So we'll try to add these slides to our web page, just maybe in case we need to remind ourselves periodically of how we should receive feedback also. And Jody, we appreciate you sharing all of them with us.
Yes, we
So
do.
are there any other comments before we go to our closing prayer?
May I just share something?
Sure.
And it goes back to many slides ago, where the wording was about how the media and the arts reinforce racism and the need for children to see themselves represented, children of color to see themselves represented. I don't know if anyone saw the Baltimore Banner article, it was either today or yesterday, about the screaming that's going on because Halle Berry has been cast as the live action Little Mermaid.
Yeah.
And there are white people who are saying, my childhood is ruined. And you really should look at this article. And this was a woman of color who saw the trailer with little girls and how enthralled they were that they actually saw someone who looked like them in this, you know, and it was just, people were saying things like, well, you know, a mermaid couldn't be Black because they live so far under the water that their skin can't make melatonin. And this lovely, she was fantastic, but she's like, mermaids aren't real, you know. But it was so sad, you know, this outrage, because, you know, whoever has chosen to do this show has decided to allow other people to be represented in their fairy tales. So,
Mary Ann, you just brought up, you know, when we going back in our discussion, we were talking about what Black men bear and what Black women bear. I'm not sure that what they bear isn't equal in a way. It's just in different ways. Black men are denied power to really make a living, be strong with their family and all that sort of thing. They were pushed out of so many of those roles. But a job has really been done on Black women. And one area is in the whole area of not seeing that beauty can be expressed in different ways and having to go by a white beauty standard. You've heard me mention before, sometimes people in my family talk about Black women and their hair issues.
Yeah.
But I mean, the self-image damage that's been done is, to me, every bit as rough and pervasive as what's been done to Black men in other things.
And look how long it took to get products for Black women's hair.
Yes.
Mary Catherine?
I wanted just to respond to what Mary Ann said about the white people complaining about the mermaid. But if you had seen the pictures of the little girls and how they screamed and yelled and were so excited.
Oh, my.
Oh, it's like us. Look. And look, it's a Black mermaid. And their faces, they were jumping up and down and clapping. It was just so beautiful to see their reaction, how excited they were. So to the other side, at least some people were very joyful. That is wonderful.
Audrey? Thanks, Mary Catherine.
I wanted to share an experience that I've had over the past week. When I was in Albuquerque, and we were taught contemplative prayer, we were asked to show with our hands what resistance looked like. We all did this. And then we were asked to show what surrender looked like, and we all did this. Okay, all 200 of us, the same things came to me. I was teaching the high school seniors in my religion class over at St. Francis this past week, and I'm teaching them contemplative prayer. So we're going to have a contemplative prayer. And so I said to all the guys in my class, and I only have guys, show me how you resist. And they all did this. And I said, show me how you surrender. And they all did this.
Oh.
Oh.
And I went, oh my God, forgive me, you've all had the talk. And they just said, yeah. I told Curtis Turner that story after class. And he said that there was a team from Howard County that came to play their basketball team in the center there that they have at St. Francis. And that team was so afraid, the administration was so afraid to bring the students into the city that they hired an off-duty policeman to accompany them. And he said, so all our students were in the gym and their students were lined up in the gym. And he said, I walked in and, Curtis is a deacon, so he had his Roman collar on. He said, I walked into the gym and I saw that off-duty policeman and didn't recognize him and went over to him and put my hand out and said, hi, he said, and he grabbed me by the neck and threw me against the wall. And he said to me, all the students in the gym, our students, gasped. And then St. Francis's off-duty policeman came running over and said, no, you've made a mistake, and he introduced it and all went away. He said, we had to debrief with our students the next day about the episode.
Oh.
He said, and what the guys said to me was, we thought that only happened to us because we're teenagers. if that's happening to you as a 40 or 50-year-old man, is there any hope for us? Do we have this the rest of our lives?
Mm.
Oh,
And with
sad.
a collar on, no less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
Thank you. We're a mess. We're
yeah,
a
we
mess.
are.
We're a mess.
So all we can keep doing is try.
Chipping away.
Work, yeah.
Keep doing,
Keep
Yeah.
doing.
keep doing, yeah.
This has taken millennia to make. We're not going to undo it in just decades.
We can change a little bit, at least it'll be a little bit. So we just have to keep on working. And just remember Sunday too, if you can be there, that would be great.
Yes, oh yeah, absolutely.
So can we all bow our heads and for a closing prayer? Dear God, thank you for the gift of this passionate group and for the Spirit's guidance. Help us be courageous enough to begin uncomfortable conversations. Help us be humble so we listen with the heart of Jesus. Help us respond with love, always aligning our Christian values with our message. Help us with the strength to persevere when hopelessness engulfs us. We lift this prayer to you through your Son. Amen.
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 Thank you all so much. And keep on, and right?
Keep on.
Get your titles to Jack.
Jack.
Okay.
And
Okay.
Dennis and Sharon and Skip, please hold us to task. If you see
Well-
something, we love you. So
I
we're
was
gonna
just going to
try to
say,
remember
feel
those.
the love in this group, can't you?
Mhm.
Yes.
Just to be able to have discussions like this. It takes
Yes.
a lot.
I
Absolutely.
agree, Skip.
For those who weren't here in the beginning, we have quite a number of people who had already something that they had to do tonight because of out of town relatives or at the Archbishop's house or so we have a lot of things going on tonight. So we thank you all for coming. And Father, don't get nervous. Are you nervous about somebody being at the Archbishop's house? You can
I'm go-
stay
I'm
on, I'll
go-
tell you
I'm go-
about it.
I'm going to be there in January.
Whoa, oh, well.
It's
No.
Kathy Youngkin. It's for her thing, her school thing. So,
Okay.
Awesome.
all right.
I'm
Okay.
assuming that we are meeting next month and maybe we will not have an agenda, but we'll
Okay.
talk.
Yes.
We
Yeah,
have to
just-
tell you that we cut this white fragility in half because Jody said we can't do it a third month. So
Yeah,
she
yeah.
and I spent a lot of time cutting. So if
Well-
there's something you missed, if you read that book, yeah, we cut out a lot.
Well, we know what it is.
Exactly.
We really do.
All
And
right.
that was accomplished.
Thank you all so much.
Okay.
Really
Thank
appreciate
Have a
it.
great
Good
week.
night,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody.
Night,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye,
See y'all.
everyone.
Love to all.
Right back at you.
Bye,
Glad
bye.
your
And
COVID people are doing better.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.